Hey there, how do you identify a suitable host lab that is a prosperous environment for your research as a postdoc? Choosing a proper postdoc is really important for your success in academia because the output during this time will be decisive for your next career stage, which could involve a faculty position if that's where you want to go. So the postdoc is really a critical time for success in academia. And nowadays people tend to do multiple postdocs, so it becomes very important to choose the right ones. So what should you look for? First of all, you should take all precautions possible to avoid ending up in a toxic workplace. I've made a separate video for that explains to you how to avoid ending up in a toxic workspace. Because if you are, things become just orders of magnitude more difficult for you for the foreseeable future, and that is a terrible situation that you should avoid really at all costs, and that requires doing the research into that host lab to really avoid stumbling into a situation like that. That is the first and maybe also most important point, but there is others. Well, there are many different pathways to identifying a suitable host lab, but one of them that is very good is that if you trust the opinion of your PhD mentor, it is simply to ask them what do they know about very good labs and about good people also that lead these labs. And often introductions by your advisor, for example, they can open the door to many opportunities for really excellent postdocs. So if you have an excellent relationship with your advisor, ask them. If that doesn't happen, or in addition to that, it is always good to have sort of a short list, like at the top 10 or something of places where you would like to end up. And that list can be generated in various ways. I mean, for example, you should really ask yourself, what do you want to do for your postdoc? You have to have some continuity with your PhD, be it in terms of methods or approaches or the topic, of course, but you can also broaden the topic, you can narrow the topic. That is all up to you. You have to think carefully through that. And through this thinking through where you want to go, you will arrive at that list, basically, inevitably. But first you have to ask yourself, what do I actually want to do? Do I want to, for example, become broader from something specific that I worked on? Or do I want to like dig deeper into an area where I just started? Or do I want to really change topics and just take that same methods toolkit that I have acquired during my PhD and apply it to a different situation? I mean, those are all completely different postdocs. They're all valid, but you have to think through them and ask yourself what fits with your goals, what fits with your personality, what really interests and fascinates you. And as you do so, then you will become aware of basically this mental map of all the places that do this sort of research. What's important then, of course, this initial list, you have to modify it based on your personal preferences and your particular situation in your personal life. For example, it may not be possible for you to move to another continent for a variety of reasons, for example, your family or whatever. So I think there is always a lot of filters from that first initial sort of wish list to arrive at the, let's say, doable wish list that you should then have. And this list should contain all of the leading labs in that field that, depending on where you want to go and how you want to do it, they are really some of the top labs. And that may very well mean changing country if that's an option for you. But, you know, have a list of these labs available. That is the starting point. Now, the next steps is picking from these labs or coming across an opportunity to join some of these labs. And as you make this decision, I think you should know that in the natural sciences, the reputation of the lab typically outweighs the reputation of the university. I think this may be different in other fields. Now, it's often the case, of course, that top universities also have some of the leading labs in a given field, but that is not necessarily so. So as you make that decision, all things considered equal, then make sure you prioritize the reputation of the lab. Now, what does that exactly entail? Well, it basically all rises and falls with the principal investigator of the lab, with the PI. The PI is the most important factor. The PI should be compatible with you in various ways. And so in order to figure that out, of course, ask friends, ask your advisor, ask people in that lab, schedule video chats with the advisor, ideally visit them, maybe even plan ahead and do a little internship in this lab before the situation even arises. Basically try to find out with as much certainty as you can if that person would work for you, basically in terms of personality and what they offer. And here are some points to consider in general terms beyond just the personality. So for example, is that lab productive? Do they produce, papers in top journals that are highly cited? That should be a very important criterion. If you want to continue in academia, this is going to be very important for you to be in a productive environment where people know how to write these papers. What size is that group? For some people, it works much better if they're in a smaller lab where the mentoring is much more intimate. But for other people, they flourish in larger labs. So play this through in your head or build on your experience from your PhD and decide what lab may be suitable. Is that lab well supported by grant funding? That is important because grant funding, of course, is an indicator of reputation and also success of the PI in this lab. But having a lot of grant funding will also mean that there are generally resources around for you to do stuff. Because if you are in a poorly supported lab, some things simply will not be possible. Expensive work like sequencing, metagenomics, metatranscriptomics, or whatever is the thing that you do. If it requires money, it is very good to be in a lab that has financial resources. And the best indicator of that is external grant money. Have postdocs from that lab been successful? Labs typically keep like a tab on where people went after they left the lab. And so do many, or at least some of those people, if the lab is relatively young, appear to be successful in the profession? And do they get the kind of jobs that you also would be interested in? I think that is an excellent indicator. Are the key papers from the lab first authored or at least co-authored by some of the postdocs that have been in this lab in the past? That is also a very good indicator if the postdocs are well integrated into the research enterprise or if things work completely differently. But that is also an important indicator if you want to be successful in that lab. Have other people been successful in that lab before in that particular position as a postdoc? Now, how much freedom will you have if you join a certain lab? That you can only find out in conversation. That has been, for example, very important for me. And is there an expectation to really just work on a given project, or can you sort of have side projects? Can you explore new avenues? If that's important for you, that is not always possible in every lab and with every PI and every funding situation. So that is important for you to explore. How much freedom will I have to do the work that I'm interested in pursuing? That might also entail taking some of the research questions with you when you leave. That is typically difficult to find out up front, but you can get a sense of that as you research what people do after they leave the lab. Do they do something entirely different, or do they take along some of those questions? Does the PI value a healthy lab environment is of course also important. Sometimes that is clear from the web page, or you can also just ask around and figure out if that's important to that particular person. And I don't mean this is just not necessarily a toxic lab, but just a lab where the lab health is not that important. It's also not going to be a good place to work. So also try to find out about that aspect. It's important. Is there a collaborative atmosphere in the lab? Do, for example, PhD students and postdocs, multiple PhD students work together on projects? Do they publish together, or does everybody basically do their own thing? That collaborative work environment is very important because it also increases your productivity. It is a source of creativity. It increases your output. You can do more if you are in a collaborative environment than in your environment where everybody is basically on a solo track. And I believe these places exist, so I think it's important to figure that out. And you can, for example, figure out by co-authored papers. So these are all important things to find out to make an informed decision. Now, I realize postdocs are financed in totally different ways. For example, they can be financed by ways of fellowships where you apply for a project to then join a lab. Then basically it's up to you to pick a lab within the constraints of that fellowship in terms of country and whatever. Or they are financed by job application. Like there is a job advertised, for example, a grant was funded and a job is advertised to fill this position in that grant, and then you apply for that. Then basically the decision has been in a way made for you. Here's an opportunity, a specific opportunity. Do you take it or not? In the end, though, I think the same rules or the same points I just mentioned, they still apply. It's just a different situation from the outset. Like basically, are you free in where you go from a particular fellowship, or is there a specific opportunity to which you respond? So that's it. I think there are some key points, and that is like, don't take this decision lightly. Really think this through. Do your research. Do take the time to make a good decision. That also means start early. In the last year of your PhD, for example, ask yourself, where do you want to go? Already start working on that shortlist. Maybe do an internship in a lab where you would like to end up as a postdoc. Having these connections is invaluable for making a connection, for example. It takes a lot of planning. Don't leave it up to chance. And with that, best of luck with finding a prosperous lab for your postdoc. And with that, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.